Dear friends, welcome to E-Pathshala. I am Dr. Vishal G. Jadhav, Department of Sociology, Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth, Pune. Today we are going to look at a module that's titled Casteism, Anti-Brahmin Movement and Indian Politics. In the previous modules we have seen how the nationalist movement that emerged against the colonial hegemony was mainly a Savarna ideology, and this Savarna ideology ensured that the questions of caste were never raised. What is casteism and how do we theorize casteism in India? These are some of the questions that are dealt with in this particular module. This module therefore will have two sections. The first section will deal with the theorization of casteism in India, and the second will talk about the rise of anti-caste movements and especially the anti-Brahmin movements and movements against the hegemonic forms of Hinduism in India. Caste discrimination and exclusion. During the 80s and 90s, caste discrimination became a much debated issue on political arena, following a report published by a government commission that mapped out and defined current backward caste and ethnic groups in India. The report also stated a set of recommendations to be implemented by the authorities, including several reservation laws for public and educational seats. Being based in deeply ingrained social structures, based discrimination is part of day-to-day life. The caste and untouchability based exclusions and discriminations essentially is structural in nature and comprehensive and multiple in coverage and involve denial of equal opportunities, particularly to the excluded groups like former untouchables. Caste and politics. Movements against caste hegemony of upper caste, both in the colonial and post-colonial periods, have immensely contributed to the restructuring of caste equations in Indian politics. Caste, a uniquely Indian social institution, and Indian politics has been subject to intensive study for many years. Many sociologists, including Andre Bethe in 1965 in his Caste, Class and Power, and Rajni Kothari in 1970 in his Caste in Indian Politics, have highlighted various aspects of caste in politics. According to M. N. Srinivas in 1957, the role played by caste in politics is in close approximation to that of the pressure group. While evaluating the role of caste associations in democratic politics, Ghanshyam Shah argued that caste associations assume the role of disseminating political education and the day-to-day functioning of political system to its members and mobilize and organize them accordingly. This strategy would enable them to enter into political bargaining with the existing political system in terms of demanding for the maximization of their representation in politics and addressing their problems. Andre Bethe holds that while westernization is taking individual away from caste identity, the role of caste in politics is taking the people towards the caste identity and thereby strengthening it. Caste also operates as the central principle in the distribution of power and material resources. Non-Brahmin and low caste movements were active during the colonial era, broadly pursuing two aims: achieving upward caste class mobility and annihilation of caste. However, in the years following independence, the traditional upper castes continued to rule in most parts of India. Caste politics in different regions. Ruptures in demography, agrarian relations and political economy of the post-independence period combined to produce the strong linkages between region and caste. Frankel argued that the fact that cognate castes and subcastes enlarged their identities through regional and provincial social organizations before the nationalist movement got underway. In particular, the different patterns of caste relations gave substance to region as a political category in states like Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. These developments established the feature of region-specific dominant caste in most parts of India. This feature came under stress at two stages when certain types of caste politics attempted to cross the regional boundaries. Both these ruptures in the established pattern of caste region equation came as opposition to upper as well as newly dominant caste in various regions. In the interplay of caste and region, Dalits and OBCs were and are often excluded or marginalized. Therefore, these sections attempt to breach the happy coincidence of caste and region by pursuing the project of all India Dalit politics and all India OBC politics, as was the case in Maharashtra. Although backward caste politics gradually emerged in UP and Bihar, it was only in the 90s that it became an issue at an all India level. After the agitation against reservations in Gujarat and Bihar in late 70s and early 80s, the agitation in many North Indian states on the issue of reservation for backward castes underlined the simmering conflict between what Lohia had described as forward and backwards. These developments had two effects. Firstly, the political discourse in the country as a whole changed considerably. Social justice became the central term around which the discourse was constructed. Such a construction facilitated the entry of caste question onto the all India political scene rather than remaining state specific. Reservations for OBCs became less controversial and also part of the policies adopted by various parties. At least at the formal level, parties conceded the claims of OBCs in terms of share in power. Politics of backward caste became an all India phenomenon. Dalits in politics. One can trace the roots of Dalit movement from Bhakti and colonial periods. However, the real quest for power in Dalit movement became eminent in the post-colonial India. Emergence of various regional leaders and political parties of Dalits have shaped electoral politics differently. It is in this context, present sections discuss the political movement of Dalits in West, South and North India. Dalit politics in Maharashtra. With the introduction of constitutional modernity and democratic space, Dalit struggle against caste inequality in post-colonial period has changed in many ways. The Republican Party was founded by the legendary Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar in 1957. However, Dalit movement in post-Ambedkar period in Maharashtra has vigorously witnessed the conflict in leadership and ideological position taken by its leaders. The converted Dalit Buddhists, mostly Mahars, relative deprived Dalit castes, idealistic Ambedkarites, new educated aspiring middle class, influence of left and many other issues fueled into the breakdown of movement and resulted in the various interest groups. Dada Sahib Gaikwad, as the tallest leader and one of the founder members of RPI, conceived by Ambedkar, which came into existence on 3rd November 1957, in post-Ambedkar era, had faced all such issues when he was leading a movement. Tel Tumde, in his analysis of post-Ambedkar Dalit movement, argued that Gaikwad represented a typical activist of the Ambedkarian movement and had a mass identity. In spite of this, it is true that RPI got fragmented twice under his leadership and he failed to unite the party. In later period, the RPI fragmented into many fractions which turned antagonistic to each other. This was also a period of alliance of many RPI factions with the Congress. Dalits in North India. In the early 1970s, Kanshiram emerged as a dynamic leader after B.R. Ambedkar, who gained all India significance by establishing Dalit organizations. With a handful of educated employees from Pune and Delhi, he set up the All India Backward and Minority Community Employees Federation, or BAMSEF, in 1973 and aspired to give it an All India dimension in the next 5 years. For some years, the BAMSEF was working informally until Kanshiram launched it formally on 6 December 1978 in Delhi. Kanshiram made the BAMSEF a pool of brains, talents and funds. The basic object of this organization, which consisted of educated Dalits who had been able to make use of the fruit of government policies, was to pay back to the more oppressed and exploited section of society to which they belonged. The BAMSEF, consisting of government employees, did not launch rallies but only held seminars. In the political field, the main function of BAMSEF was to supply the funds and dedicated workers to the Bahujan Samaj Party, which was founded in early 80s. Although BAMSEF was regarded by some as pool of brains, talents and funds, it kept a low profile because of service rules restrictions on public employees. For furtherance of its objective, Kanshiram proceeded to set up a new organization known as Dalit Shoshit Samaj Sangharsh Samiti on December 6, 1981 as a non-political agitational arm of this movement. Its primary purpose was to create awareness amongst the Dalits. The rise in the political standing of any party can be equated with the rise of the political fortune of its leaders. Having gained political experience and using BAMSEF and DS4 as base organization, Kanshiram decided to lay the foundation of political party, the BSP, on 14th April 1984 on the birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to fulfill the political aspirations of the Dalits. BSP gave a new hope to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes by creating a strong platform in Indian politics under the leadership of their own community leaders. In Punjab, the influence of BSP as a political force was felt during February 1992 assembly elections when it managed to capture 9 seats, thus becoming the main opposition party in the Vidhan Sabha. The BSP candidates were runner-ups in 34 seats. It also won a Lok Sabha seat in February 1991 elections. With the November 1993 elections in Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh and Rajasthan, Kanshiram-led BSP emerged as a political force at the national level. Dalit politics in South India, a case of Tamil Nadu. The PMK and Dalit parties which seemed to introduce caste concerns into Tamil politics thus arguably arise from the cozy relationship between the dominant backward caste and the two Dravidian parties. Honours have been heaped on Muthuram Lingan Thevar, for instance, whilst lower caste politicians are perceived to lack recognition and respect. The continuing underrepresentation of Dalit politicians in cabinets and ministry portfolio questions Dravidian pluralism. Caste politics in this period, furthermore, has been synonymous with outbreaks of caste violence. Lower caste, especially Dalit assertion, has challenged the social status of higher caste and incurred disproportionate, forceful retaliation. Dalit assertion has also led to conflict with state authorities, emphasizing that access to political institutions is not straightforward. An unintended consequence of MBC and Dalit activism, therefore, is that social fault lines have assumed a collective caste character and rendered violence a recognized, albeit censured feature of the political repertoire. Anti-Brahmin and anti-caste movements tracing its history. The non-Aryan, non-Brahmin movements in Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, the Dalit movement in Punjab and Karnataka were against the Aryan conquest and Brahmin exploitation through religion and culture. These movements, being aimed at the argument of the original inhabitant, have a common tag, Adi, which means original inhabitant. Most of the Dalit movements like Adi Dharma in Punjab, Adi Hindu in UP and Hyderabad, Adi Dravid, Adi Andhra, Adi Karnataka in South India have a common claim of the Dalits and Shudras being the original inhabitants of India. Gail Omvett writes, it was in the 1920s, however, that Dalits began to organize strongly and independently throughout many regions of India. The most important of the early Dalit movement were the Adi Dharma movement in Punjab. The movement under Ambedkar in Maharashtra, mainly based amongst Mahar, which had its organizational beginning in 1924. The Namashudra movement in Bengal, the Adi Dravid movement in Tamil Nadu, the Adi Karnataka movement, the Adi Hindu movement mainly centered around Kanpur in UP, and the organizing of Pulayas and Cherumans in Kerala. The Namashudra movement in 1872 was the first protest against the social authority of the higher caste. Shekhar Bandyopadhyay views the Namashudra movement in Bengal is the story of an Antyaj or untouchable caste transforming itself from the amphibious peripheral multitude into a settled agricultural community, protesting against the age-old social disabilities and economic exploitation it suffered from, entering the vortex of institutional politics and trying to derive benefit out of it through an essentially loyalist political strategy. The Namashudras, earlier known as Chandals, lived mainly in the low-lying swamp area of eastern Bengal. The Namashudras embraced Islam or Christianity to avoid the stigma of untouchability in the early 20th century. Chandal movement of 1872 to 73 led to the formation of the Namashudra. Led by Harichand Thakur of Faridpur and his son in the subsequent period, the movement believed in education and self-respect. Next Namashudra movement, Aaj Dharma movement, led by Mangu Ram in Punjab, made a substantial contribution to the social and political life of Dalits in Punjab. He was influenced by the Gadar movement, a radical organization in California aimed at liberating India from British rule through armed insurrection. Similar to the Adi movement in Punjab, Uttar Pradesh and the Namashudra movement in Bengal, the Adi movements in South India had their resonance in constructing Dalit identity. The untouchable movements in Nagpur, Adi Dravid movement in Tamil Nadu, Adi Karnataka movement in Mysore, Adi Andhra movement in Andhra Pradesh under Madras Presidency, Adi Hindu movement under the Nizam reign had paved the way for constructing the Dalit identity in South India. Anti-Brahmin movement in Maharashtra. From the second half of the 19th century, particularly in South India and in Bombay Presidency, the sons of rich peasants among the dominant land-owning castes and of local traders and money lenders who expanded into commerce started acquiring English education. A small fraction of this newly educated class came from lower Shudra, cultivating artisan and trading castes, and even from untouchables. In 19th century Maharashtra, Pune and Kolhapur provided leadership to the emergence of backward castes. One of the first products of Christian missionary education was Jyotiba Phule of Pune, who belonged to the Shudra caste of gardeners. Phule is acknowledged as the father of non-Brahmin movement in India. He wrote several books like Gulamgiri for the material and spiritual improvement of the lower classes. The condition of the untouchables horrified him. He called upon the people to revolt against Hindu casteist gods and degrading religious practices. He wanted the lower caste to form their own associations, create a spirit de corps, and work for their emancipation from the age-old degradation as Shudras in society. Education and religion. Jyotiba Phule founded the Satyashodak Samaj to unite all the backward castes on a common platform. He advocated the principle of adequate representation for members of all castes in public services. The non-Brahmin movement generated in Bombay province had its effect in Kolhapur, a small Maratha state under the control of the Bombay government by Maharaja Chhatrapati Shahu. The Maharaja, displeased with the Brahmins, devoted much of his time to the non-Brahmin movement. He declared in 1902 that he would reserve at least half the post in his state for qualified men of non-Brahmin communities. To give fair opportunities to all communities, the prince started a hostel in Kolhapur city from non-Brahmin youths. Kolhapur may be said to be the first state to adopt a reservation policy, though there have been some ineffective attempts earlier by the British government to break the monopoly of one community. Kolhapur, therefore, has been a landmark in backward class movements toward equality. The backward class movement in India originated in Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu. Jyotirao Phule was the ideologue of non-Brahmin movement in Maharashtra. He rejected the Hindu scriptures and the caste system. According to Phule, Hindu religion was both the ideological means of suppression and the cause of poverty of the low castes. Phule's ideas, education and organization were the means to create unity and sense of identity among the non-Brahmin caste and thereby create free and just society. Therefore, Phule and Ambedkar are still powerful source of inspiration for the low caste to mobilize themselves. The Satyashodak movement of both Jyotiba Phule and Shahu Maharaj influenced the North Karnataka, in particular the South India in general. There were branches of Satyashodak Samaj at Belgav, Nipani, Dharwad and Hubli. So also Chhatrapati Shahu's non-Brahmin movement spread to Karnataka. This movement of Shahu Maharaj was in fact continued part of the Satyashodak movement of Mahatma Phule. In 1920, the Satyashodak Samaj was transformed into a political movement known as the non-Brahmin movement. Thus, non-Brahmin movement led by Shahu Maharaj posed a challenge to the traditional social order and opposed the Brahminical domination and supremacy. Surrounded by Brahmins, Shahu Maharaj first appointed non-Brahmin in his administration. His most important work was initiation of school and hostel for non-Brahmin castes and for Dalits. The non-Brahmin leaders of Karnataka were so much influenced by Shahu Maharaj that they invited him to non-Brahmin conference at Hubli in 1920. Before this, Shahu Maharaj invited Karnataka non-Brahmin leaders to Kolhapur and gave financial assistance to start education organizations like schools and hostels. Thus, the Satyashodak movement of Mahatma Jyotiba Phule and Chhatrapati Shahu Maharaj greatly influenced Karnataka. As a result, there was an emergence of prominent leaders like Sir Siddappa Kambli, Anna Sahib Latte, Pandit Appa Chikkodi, P.G. Halakatti, Meena Sinakai, Siddappa Hosamani and others. These leaders greatly contributed to the cause of non-Brahmin movement, and the communities like Lingayats, Reddy, Jain, Maratha, Muslim, Kurubas and others came to the forefront, so there was much awakening and much amongst these communities. Anti-Brahmin movement in Tamil Nadu. The non-Brahmin movement of the 1910s and 1920s and much more violent radical Dravidian or anti-Aryan movement launched by E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar in 1930s are the important phases in the history of Tamil Nadu backward caste movement. One of Naikar's main target was the temple, and he mobilized a militantly anti-Hindu campaign, ostensibly in the name of atheism, to smash the temples and destroy the gods. The important factor which created the strain for the origin of non-Brahmin movement is the domination of Brahmins in education and government employment. Finally, we see that the Mandal Commission comes to a conclusion that the non-Brahmin movement was started when the runaway lead taken by the Tamil Nadu and Telugu Brahmins in the field of education in erstwhile Madras Presidency, and it is well documented. By the turn of the century, the male literacy rate amongst the Tamil Brahmins was 73.6% as against a similar rate among the Velalas of 6.9%, whereas the male literacy in English was 17.9% amongst the Tamil Brahmins. It was only 0.19% amongst the Velalas. The Brahmins had established a near monopoly of the government services and the professions. As far back as 1851, the Madras Revenue Board had instructed the district collectors to restrict the number of Brahmin entrants into the service. In spite of this, the Brahmin domination of the government services and professions went on unabated. The caste domination in the Provincial Congress Committee had been well established. Alerted by the advent of the Montague-Chelmsford reforms and diarchy, the non-Brahmin elite caste took the lead in establishing first the South Indian Liberal Federation and secondly the Justice Party in 1916. After coming to power in 1920s, the party expanded in 1921 the scope of the 1881 order by requiring all heads of departments to distribute appointments of all the grades among the various communities. Mandal movement and the rise of Yadav politics. The OBC reservations as per Mandal Commission were implemented under the government of Prime Minister V.P. Singh in early 1990s. This led to severe protest from upper caste students who not only demanded the abolishment of Mandal Commission but also that of reservations of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Jaffelot notes that the Mandalization of Indian politics contributed to the democratization of traditionally conservative democracy. The rise of the OBCs is first of all the rise of the Yadav and the Kurmis as their share among the MPs testify. Together they represent about 15% of the North Indian members of Parliament in the 1990s, as much as the Brahmin or Rajput members of Parliament. While the Yadavs and Kurmis alone had representatives in the Lok Sabha until the 1970s, new castes joined the political arena in 1980s. The Lodhis, the Koiris, the Gujars and the Malis, and 1990s such as Jaiswals, the Telis and the Kachis. However, the share of the Yadav and the Kurmi has grown too, so much so that each one of these castes represents about 1/3 of the OBC members of Parliament of North India since 1989. The Kurmis organized themselves as early as the Yadavs through caste associations. However, Yadavs have been at the forefront of the OBC mobilization since the very beginning. The leader of the All India Backward Caste Federation in 1960s and 70s, Brahma Prakash Chaudhary, was a Yadav. B.P. Mandal himself was a Yadav, and Yadav leaders have consistently paid greater interest to his report. After the Janata Dal took over in 1989, they mobilized in favor of implementing the Mandal Commission report. Sharad Yadav, the Minister of Textile and Food Processing in VP Singh's government, was among the most vocal. After the anti-Mandal agitation started, he was at the forefront of the counter mobilization in Delhi and elsewhere in the country until he launched his Mandal Rath Yatra in late 1992 and early 1993 in reaction to the Supreme Court's decision regarding the exclusion of the creamy layer of OBCs from the quotas. The court used this expression to designate the elite among the OBCs who did not need any help from the state and therefore should be entitled to any quotas. The Janata Dal, with Lalu Prasad Yadav as president and Sharad Yadav as the leader of the legislative group in Lok Sabha, then lobbied for excluding the well-off peasants from the creamy layer. They were obviously defending the interests of the castes, since many Yadavs had become relatively rich. Eventually, the pressure exerted by the Yadavs and other OBC leaders proved to be effective, and the creamy layer was defined in a rather loose way. It comprises only the OBC applicants from established families or those whose father owned land beyond 85% of the acreage permitted by the Sealing Act. When the 27% reservation was eventually implemented at the center after the Supreme Court decision of November 1992, the upper caste did not resist it anymore. They resigned themselves to the role of numbers. Moreover, the liberalization of the economy also had begun to make careers in private sectors so that affirmative action laws did not apply more attractive. Simultaneously, having won the battle over quotas, the low caste did not feel an acute need for solidarity anymore. The very notion of OBC started to lose its edge. The general OBC category was in fact used by Yadav elite to promote its interests. Such an elite manipulation was not uncommon in the past, since the Kisan identity promoted by Charan Singh was also perceived by many Jats as a means to mobilize a large social base, and Lohia had deplored it already in the 1960s. Thus, in this module we have seen how casteism is theorized, what is meant by caste, what is meant by varna, what is meant by jati. We have also seen how Dr. B.R. Ambedkar questioned this whole notion of purity and pollution, the very anchor on which casteism is based. In doing so, he also questioned religion itself. It was not only Dr. Ambedkar who questioned casteism, there were other stalwarts like Jyotiba Phule, Periyar, Ramaswamy Naikar in the south also. Thus, we have seen how casteism prevails even today in the post-colonial period, and it is being questioned at various levels, even at the level of gender.